Well, good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony, which today commemorates the 104th anniversary of the Battle of the Neck. My name is Richard Cruz, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Lieutenant Cecilia Berryman. We're honoured to acknowledge Mr John King, President of the Return and Services League of Australia, ACT branch. We also welcome the representatives from the United States Naval Academy Centre for Cyber Security Studies who are attending this evening's ceremony. As always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. And during this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors and students on behalf of the following schools. From Queensland, Ormiston College Primary Department and Holy Spirit Primary School, New Farm. And from Western Australia, Byford Secondary College. Australia's Federation Guard is a tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catapult party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier within the Hall of Memory.
Catapult party, rest on.
If you're able, I invite you all to please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Catapult party, attention! Catapult party, present, arms.
Students, you may be seated. I would now like to invite Dr. Brendan Nelson, Director of the Australian War Memorial, to deliver an address.
We pause here, free and confident heirs to a legacy born of idealism, forged in self-sacrifice and given to our generation, here in the heart of the land they loved, on the 104th anniversary of the most tragic battle fought by the Australian Army in its history. And that is the Battle of the Neck at Gallipoli on the 7th of August, 1915. Following the Gallipoli landing, there had been a stalemate at Gallipoli, and after 3 months, a series of coordinated attacks had been planned and were executed. The objectives were Hill 971 and Hill Q. The Australians would begin the Battle of Lone Pine at 4:30 in the afternoon of the 6th of August, 4 days of subterranean anarchy. The New Zealanders would attack at Channock Bear, their finest and most tragic battle. And the dismounted light horse would charge at the Neck in the northern part of the Anzac sector at 4:30 in the morning of the 7th of August. There would be 4 waves. The first 2 waves of 150 each were the 8th Light Horse from Victoria. The 3rd and 4th waves would be the Western Australian dismounted light horse. The Turkish trenches were only 20 to 60 metres away. The commanding officer of the 8th Light Horse, the first 2 waves, was a man called Alexander Henry White. He was 33 years old. He was a maltster, a beer maker from Ballarat, and he loved the men of the 8th Light Horse. Philip Schuler was the reporter, the correspondent from the Melbourne Age, who was present, who observed and recorded what would happen. He said that White shook hands with his fellow officers and then stepped down into the trench. The artillery bombardment of the Turkish lines had finished early, and much of it had gone over them in any case. And in eerie silence, as the Turks tested their machine guns and rifles, White, with his watch in hand, said, "Men, you have 10 minutes to live, and I will lead you." And Schuler recorded the whistle blowing, and every one of them went over, and White would advance only 10 paces before he fell. Of the 300 officers and men under White's command in the first 2 waves, 153 died with him, another 80 were wounded. As was depicted in Peter Weir's 1981 Gallipoli film, they tried unsuccessfully to stop the attack. And then the Western Australians filed in over the dead, the dying and the wounded. They wrote last letters to loved ones, took off their wedding rings, pinned them to the inside of the trench. Trooper Harold Rush famously embraced the man next to him and said, "Goodbye, God bless you, Cobber," which would become his epitaph for his headstone at Walker's Ridge Cemetery. Held hands with that man and they said a prayer. And then they all went over. The official war historian, founder of the Australian War Memorial, Charles Bean, recorded when the 4th wave went over, it included 2 brothers, Western Australians, Gresley and Wilfred Harper. And he described Wilfred Harper running to his death like a schoolboy in a foot race. Sergeant Cliff St Pinnock miraculously survived the first wave. He wrote to his parents 3 days later, and he said roll call was the saddest. 47 of 550 answered the call. I cried like a baby. At the end of the First World War, Charles Bean, the official historian, didn't come back to Australia immediately. Instead, he went back to Gallipoli. He took a historical party. And when he got to the Neck, he described the area the size of 2 tennis courts as resembling that of scattered thin white snow. So thickly clustered were the bones, he said, it wasn't possible to pass without treading upon them. Alexander Henry White had 2 things on his skeletal remains that he took to his death. A gold locket on a chain around his neck, in which was a photograph of his wife Myrtle and his infant son, whom he called Young Bill. And the other thing he had on him was a Bible. And in the Bible was a newspaper cutting, a poem. And it said, "Let me be a little braver when temptation bids me waver. Let me strive a little harder to be all that I can be. Let me be a little meeker with the brother that is weaker. Let me think more of my neighbour and a little less of me." To young Australians, when you sing the national anthem, Australians all, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. Reflect on why we are free.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway lands. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Lieutenant Leo William Hall Anderson. Leo Anderson was born on the 18th of June 1895 in Launching Place, Victoria, the son of William and Lucy Anderson. His brother Noel was born 2 years later after the family had returned to William's hometown of Ballarat. In a terrible blow for the family, on the 3rd of February 1899, William died suddenly at the age of 32. Lucy would later remarry but remained in Ballarat. Leo went on to attend Ballarat Agricultural High School and towards the end of his term there applied for and was accepted into the Royal Military College, Dundroon. He entered RMC on the 7th of March 1912 and became a member of 3rd class. A little over into his training, Anderson was part of the Guard of Honour for the naming ceremony of Canberra, which took place on the 12th of March 1913. On the 2nd of November 1914, just a few months after the outbreak of First World War, Anderson graduated early and was commissioned with the rank of lieutenant. The following day, he was posted to the 8th Light Horse Regiment, which was training at Broadmeadows Camp in Victoria. Anderson embarked with his unit from Melbourne aboard the transport ship Star of Victoria on the 25th of February 1915, bound for Egypt. The 8th Light Horse arrived in Egypt after the bulk of the AIF had sailed for Lemnos in preparation for the landing at Gallipoli. The 8th Light Horse Regiment underwent an intense training regime over the following weeks. Following the landings at Gallipoli and the need to reinforce the infantry battalions, it was decided to send the Light Horse Regiments to Gallipoli. On the 16th of May, the 8th Light Horse Regiment embarked from Alexandria bound for Gallipoli. Around 4 p.m. on the 21st of May, the men of the Light Horse were ferried from their ships to the beach. In the ensuing days, the regiment would move up to Walker's Ridge and into frontline positions opposite the neck. They spent the following months rotating between frontline duty, supports, and rear areas. With the Gallipoli campaign deadlocked, it was decided to launch a new offensive to capture the Sari Bear Range. On the 5th of August, the 8th Light Horse Regiment took over the frontline trenches at Russell's Top in preparation. The men were keen to do well, but knew their enemy were waiting. Anderson was amongst the first wave of men to go over the top on the 7th of August. When Commanding Officer Colonel Alexander White blew his whistle to attack around 4:30 a.m., the Australians of the 8th Light Horse rose as one and were met by a withering hail of Ottoman rifle and machine gun fire. Anderson was likely shot very early on. He was brought back into the trench and evacuated to No. 1 Australian Casualty Clearing Station, which, due to the high amount of casualties, was a scene of chaos. Sadly, his wound proved to be mortal and he died a short time later. The Reverend Edward Makem, chaplain for the 3rd Light Horse Brigade, officiated at Anderson's burial at the Ari Burnous Cemetery later that afternoon. Lieutenant Colonel Leslie Magar, VC, wrote of Anderson that this officer showed excellent qualities, ability and promise, and by his early death, the service and the Commonwealth suffered a great loss. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lieutenant Leo William Hall Anderson, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
If you're able, please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Catapult Party present arms. Party in woods, turn. Catapult Party, quick, march.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys and students, that concludes this evening's last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.